I'm Carrington McDuffie. This is Star Seeds of Freedom. I have a special show for you today. We're going to be talking about everything from the Constitution to music to the nature of reality. Welcome to Star Seeds of Freedom. I'm Carrington McDuffie, and I have a guest with me today that most of you will be familiar with, SG Anon. And those of you who are not are going to be searching for him after this show everywhere, because really he offers the most, I'd say, precise and thoughtful, and also the most wide-ranging and in-depth research and analysis out there. So, SG, welcome to the show. It is awesome to have you with me.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So, I want to extend my appreciation, first of all, to your family as well as to you, because you generously share your time, and I know that's time away from them, and that means a lot to all of us. So in this crazy transition that we're in, you've put a lot into it. So please thank them for me. We have a nice chunk of time today, but I'm going to just get going with my questions at the risk of treating you like a magic 8-ball, which 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 we all do. It's just far too tempting. You know, there are so many burning questions in this. I feel like we're in a psych ward being run by psychopaths, and so that leads to a lot of questions, and you handle the questions so beautifully. So you and I had touched on the whole matter of our Constitution here in the U.S., the original one, the one that we've been dealing with, and there may be a third, I have heard. And this is important for people to understand what we've been living under in this time. And I wanted to also mention that I heard your interview with Gail on Free Range, her show Free Range, where you guys talked about how most of Congress and the judges, maybe pretty much all, virtually all, have not taken an oath of office, or that the oath they took is fraudulent because "so help me God" is in caps, and there's all this trickster stuff about that, about the language and how it's presented. So I was wondering if I was thinking maybe we could pick up from there. I know David Straight and Anna von Reitz and Brent Johnson and others have really been addressing this for years, maybe even decades, but still I think it's not understood to many, and I was hoping we could drill down on this, just why those oaths are fraudulent, how that relates to our corporate constitution.
Well, I'm glad that we're starting with this question, Carrington, because this is the linchpin of understanding that I think a lot of patriots need to appreciate what bureaucratic tyranny actually looks like and how it's accomplished. What we've seen, we have to do a little bit of a history lesson, but what we've seen over the last 100 years or so, 111 years at this point with the Federal Reserve System, is an intentional destruction of the purchasing power of the US dollar, and also the strength of the American economic and industrial base as a result of that over that same period of time, right? We've had a couple of world wars. You know, anytime war enters into an economic and manufacturing circumstance, it accelerates the process out of necessity and need. But those were not, accelerated with the idea of amplifying the sovereignty, the power, the hegemony of the US dollar. That was only a temporary goal as we look back through the mid-20th century, and we can appreciate the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, how the US economy essentially became the world standard. And then beginning in the 70s, it was purposefully put into a tailspin that we have seen accelerated in ways that I didn't even think was possible in the last 5 to 7 years. So that being said, what happened? How did we arrive here? What's going on? Well, we have to go all the way back to the US Civil War, and we have to understand what was actually happening within the Congress and within the states in those days. The US Civil War itself propped up as a result of the conversation, of course, between states' rights. And we know that sort of from our history books. That theme was big enough with that conflict that even it could not be drummed out of the record, right? So we look back and we see the struggle for states' rights. But what were the states really struggling against? It wasn't just the slavery, although the slavery was a component faction of that. It was against the subjugation, the subterfuge that was being introduced within the body of the Congress to allow for the printing of U.S. money that was not backed by gold and outside of the U.S. Treasury. And this was going to be used to bolster the economic situation in some of the poorer states and emerging territories, but it was going to have the net effect of essentially making the other states of the Union and those states that had already admitted themselves to the Union in the last 75 years at that point in time, right? It was going to give them the entirety of the bill. So the slavery issue, the states' rights issue, the taxation and finance issue led up to the fracture of the American system in the mid-19th century. The fracture was stoked by the flames of foreign money, particularly out of the Rothschild dynasty in England. And it's very interesting when we look at the American Civil War, the fact that we did not end up as a protectorate of England, or the fact that some of our country did not end up on the other side of that as a protectorate of England, is primarily due to Russia and the actions of the Russian Tsar on behalf of friendship with the American system. Russia actually sent several frigates, hundreds of naval personnel to U.S. port systems to prevent the interference from foreign powers, particularly the foreign and Western banking powers in Central and Western Europe at that time. Russia was very keenly aware of how those factions operated and what they had done to Napoleon about a half century prior. So looking at that situation, we come out of the U.S. Civil War. We've managed to keep the country together, but we've paid a dear cost. And it wasn't just in blood and sweat, and it wasn't just in the destruction of a generation and a half of our young men and women here in the United States. It was also through the selling of debt and the selling of surety bonds to finance the war effort, particularly on behalf of the Confederacy. So we have a situation where the Confederacy is completely destitute and bankrupt at the end of the war. The Union is also bankrupt, but has a workable industrial base. And so what happens is we see conversations begin to emerge in the federal Congress towards the end of the Civil War, discussing how we're going to pay for all of this, how we're going to rebuild, how in the world are we going to find the money, the economic manpower and momentum to put our system back together. And the answer was that we couldn't find it. Abraham Lincoln was actually very opposed to the idea of asking for money elsewhere. That's one of the reasons he was shot. But it was eventually arrived at that the United States would accept a loan from the Bank of England or the Bank of London. I forget which entity it was specifically at the time, but it was the main financial institution in London. The United States government accepted a loan, excuse me, with a 40-year repayment plan, which takes us up to around about 1913, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. But the 40-year repayment plan had an exorbitant amount of interest, and the loan itself was so many magnitudes higher than what the current U.S. GDP was capable of producing in 1867, which is when the loan actually came through, that it was essentially an entrapment device. What happened, of course, is that moving into the early 1870s, it was clear that we couldn't even make the interest payments on the loan. So we defaulted on this loan in less than 5 years. And what happened with the default, was the agreement was struck with the Grant administration, with the Ulysses Grant administration, sort of up against the wall, to create a collateral state situation, a literal collateral government here in the United States of America that would function as our good faith on repayment of our loan, right? We had already defaulted, so this was a way that we were going to promise to repay it yet again. And what was established was the national jurisdiction of the District of Columbia and the corporatizing of the United States system. In 1868, and 1 year after this loan came through from Western Europe, we saw the passage of I believe it was the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which is the amendment for citizenship. It guarantees citizenship. But that's sort of a sleight of hand. Citizenship comes as a result of the grantor. Citizenship is a subjective position under the law. You can only be a citizen when there is an authority or an entity over and above you that grants you citizenship. It essentially is granting you the right to live or domicile within a particular region or a particular territory. But those Americans that were born in the United States of America prior to the Civil War were not known as U.S. citizens. They were known as American nationals. They were known as Americans. They were born upon the land, so the land was by birthright theirs. No one but God himself could instruct or give over land to one party or another when a party had been born upon it and had inherited that land as a result of that birthright. So the passage of that citizenship amendment leads us to the corporatization of the United States government in 1871, right, with the Organic Act of Columbia, with the Grant administration. So what happened is all of the American nationals within inside the system were made collateral on behalf of this loan that we were just talking about a moment ago without their knowledge. And then they were incorporated without their knowledge inside a business entity, which later became the District of Columbia, the U.S. government. Now, you talked about constitutions, and this is where it comes into play. Every large corporate entity has bylaws. It has a mission statement, it has a vision, it has policies, procedures, bylaws that govern the behavior of the business entity. That is what the Constitution of the United States is. The Constitution for
Or
the Republic of the United States of America is a different document. Now, they extracted most of the same text, right, the same language in the Constitution of the United States, but they left out a couple of very key amendments, and one of those amendments was titles of nobility. So, in other words, you could not be eligible to run for public office or to serve as a public servant in the Republic of the United States if you had any vested interest back to a title of any nobility anywhere. That included the British Crown. So that automatically precludes certain levels of banking and finance, right? Certain levels of religious clergy who have sworn not only oaths under God, but oaths to a specific church, which may or may not be acting at the behest of another state. The Titles of Nobility Amendment was a very large bulwark against the type of electoral corruption that we're now seeing on full display, and it was removed in the 1871 version of our document. So we go along for about 30 or 40 years, at this point in time. We go from 1871, 72 up to 1913, really 1911, and then 1912 and 13. What happens in 1911 is a discussion between a number of very powerful banking and business interests here in the United States of America, many of whom arose post 1871 within the United States. You had Carnegie and members of the Carnegie family. You had the members of the Rockefeller family, members of the Guggenheim family, the Warburg family, the J.P. Morgan family, the Stanley rail car family. I forget the gentleman who was responsible for that. Milton, I believe, was his name. So you had a number of different powerful financial interests, all here in the United States of America, get together on an island off the coast of Georgia in 1911. And the island is Jekyll Island. And so what occurred at this meeting was a discussion on how to incorporate the United States of America and this bureaucratic governmental tyranny even further, how to self-insulate and self-entrench it. Because by the time we arrived at the Woodrow Wilson election in early 1911, 1912, in that election season, the United States had yet again defaulted on its 40-year promise, right? So we defaulted on the first one within 5 years. We defaulted on the second one by the turn, really just after the turn of the 20th century. And so now we're in a position financially where the United States of America has a choice to make. And that choice is to allow the Western European financiers to continue to expand and consolidate their control in government in exchange for not calling the note, or we can call the note and risk ripping the republic apart. And this was one of the things that led to a very tense presidency of, I believe it was Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s, and then a tense electoral campaign with Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and the other candidate, I forget the other candidate's name, in the 1912 election. All of this topic that we're discussing right now about the financial entanglements of the United States government were well known and well understood by the political activists of the day. And so we arrive at this meeting in Jekyll Island. There's significant resistance in this meeting on behalf of Benjamin Guggenheim and John Jacob Astor. John Jacob Astor is the richest man in the world at the time. I believe his wealth in today's dollars is about $205 billion personally, right? We had Benjamin Guggenheim, a very powerful family who also held out and resisted that. And there was one other who I can't remember right off the top of my head. There was a core pocket of 3 resistors at this multi-head meeting that occurred. And the very next year, the Titanic set sail from Southampton, England. All of the resistance to this consolidated financial system in the United States of America was aboard the Titanic, having been invited specifically and personally to the maiden voyage by none other than J.P. Morgan himself. Now, J.P. Morgan held a very large insurance policy against the vessel in cases of catastrophic emergency or loss of life or loss of the marine vessel itself. And Morgan canceled his trip about 6 hours before the Titanic was set to leave Southampton. Of course, we all know what occurred at Southampton, and Astor and Guggenheim and others did not make it out alive. The very next year, the Federal Reserve Act, introduced by Aldrich Rockefeller into the United States Congress, is passed overwhelmingly with support and signed into law, alongside edicts that established the IRS, the ATF, and the FBI. This was the establishment of the central focal point of bureaucratic governmental tyranny, shadow tyranny, with inside the government of the United States. If you're the one issuing the money to a party, it does not matter what that party does. It does not matter what that party believes or how that party conducts itself in relation to you. That party will always be coming back to you. It will always be the needy party if you are the one providing essentially the energetic value exchange, right? Money, the exchange of spiritual energy here in the world that allows for that party to continue forward in its existence. The same is true here in this metaphor of what occurred to the United States of America. Now, we could get into a huge history lesson about how they consolidated it even further, centralized it further, utilized the power of the intelligence community in the post-war world to facilitate a tyrannical system of economic enslavement worldwide. But suffice to say, all of that did occur, and so now we are where we are in today's world. The Republic of the United States of America, the Republic for the Union of the United States, has been absent from the government or from the international nation state stage since the late 19th century. And what has been masquerading in its place is a shadow form of control in the background that involves money, power, the military intelligence and industrial community, and private citizenry in the background. And many of those private citizens not even being citizens of the United States of America itself. So they're foreign nationals. This incestuous infestation that has existed in the background of our government has directed the policy and behavior of our government for very nearly 100 years, or just over really 100 years at this point in time. It's why you've seen agencies like the ATF dragging elderly men out of gun stores. It's why you see the FBI raiding Catholic homes and Catholic mothers. It's why you see the IRS, putting boot stomping agents on the ground with military grade weaponry. Right? These are all agencies that are outside of the Constitution for the Republic of the United States, but they are not outside of the Constitution of the United States, right? And so you have a difference in attitude, a legal attitude that is allowed to happen under God, because when we look at where the law comes from, it's God, then it's the people, and then the people can exhibit different forms of the natural law, different forms of the holy law, so long as the core components remain the same. And I would venture to anyone that those core components can be summed up in the Ten Commandments, or the commandments that were given by the Christ, or there are various offshoots that are recognized by other schools of religious thought. There's the same core principles in the natural law, right? And so we, the people, become the emanators of the law unless we allow our birthright to emanate that law and to enforce that law to be usurped. And unfortunately, even though we didn't consciously allow it, we didn't intentionally let any of this happen, right? This was all subterfuge in the background as we worked by the sweat of our brow to provide a family and a life for ourselves. It did occur. And so we have to move into a position now where we work from behind the eight ball and we come back and make up for our lost time and our lost ground. And we revert the world back to the Republic for the United States, which is the process, Carrington, that we're living through right now.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And I have looked for, I've searched for the Constitution for the United States online. I cannot find it. And any copy, I mean, I have copies of the Constitution but it's not the real one. So it's somewhere, though. We know it still exists, right? And this all to me points to, I mean, there's so many things that are relevant to this right at this very moment, but one of the things I'm seeing going on is reflects what you've spoken about just now and in other interviews, the tyranny of bureaucracy. And what a lot of states are doing now is trying to get around the Electoral College using that, trickster sleight of hand way that they have. And I think a lot of Americans don't know what the Electoral College is, what it's for, why it's there. And it's really important. I feel that follows from everything you just said. Could you talk about that some for our listeners?
I'd be happy to. And I want to preface by saying that my knowledge of history is probably a lot more in depth than my knowledge of the political machinations, right? But the Electoral College, as my understanding, is the bulwark against tyranny of the masses, right? Because prior to the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, I believe it was the 18th Amendment, it might have been the 17th Amendment. Um, it was the amendment that established popular vote for United States senators. Prior to that, we had we the people that would go to the polls and the precinct stations, the polling stations, and we would cast a ballot for who we wanted, right? And so the population, the we the people mass population of a state would choose their representative. And so you had the people of a community, the people of a state, or even of a territory that was ascendant into the Union of the United States to have the opportunity to participate in the lower house, the people's house. That's why we have a bicameral Congress. We have a House of Representatives, which functions on behalf of the popular voter, the everyday person on the street, right? The U.S. Senate was always supposed to represent the interest of the state body itself. So that would be the interest of your state legislature, the interest of your state governor, the interests of those who you, in this model, should have also given your popular vote already too, right? So having senator electoral process being undertaken by the legislative body and by the gubernatorial body, it's why the constitutional right to appoint senators, right, on behalf of a state when a senator dies in office or is no longer able to fulfill the role is reserved for the governor. You don't see a referendum or a popular vote referendum in many of the U.S. states, if any. California might be an exception. But most of the time, a senatorial position, if it falls open prior to the lapse of the term, is filled by appointment rather than by popular election. And so the same is true of the Electoral College as a whole, right? The Electoral College is designed to reflect the vote for the president of the United States, and both of the parties that I just highlighted, the state interested bodies and the we the people population of the state itself, must have agreement at that popular vote level, right, that occurs within that state to appoint the correct elector. But at the end of the day, the legislature is able to decide its own electors. And this is what occurred with the 2020 presidential election in some regards. And this is one of the reasons that you have seen such tremendous discussion around who has the right to have the final say on the official selection for candidate on behalf of a group of people within a United States territory, within a United States state. The Electoral College is designed to function in a fraudless system by allowing for the people inside a domicile or inside a territory or a residence or a state or whatever to select their individuals locally that will serve them and serve on behalf of them at that state level. So their legislative body, any court elections that they might have, their governor's race, other cabinet positions and key elected positions within that state. And then the Electoral College is then made functional through the actions of those bodies. And so if you have a state, say Missouri, for example, here in the United States of America, and you have the state legislature of Missouri monitoring the progress of an election night for a presidential election, and you have the people, we the people of Missouri, going out to all of their various polling centers and precincts. They're casting their ballots. Those ballots are getting reported up the chain to the county. The county is tabulating and reporting up the chain to the legislature. The legislature receives the tally count from each county, right? And so that is how the legislature knows which electors to select on behalf of the state of Missouri for the president of the United States, on behalf of the people of Missouri. But what if the legislature 3 days after the election is served with empirical, irrefutable, inarguable proof that more than half of the election is completely null and void because it was so rife with fraud that the true outcome, the true determinate outcome, is impossible? Well, now a legislator or a legislature as a body has a powerfully important decision to make. Do we cast the electoral selection for the last lawfully elected president of the United States and act in our own interest, ostensibly on behalf of the people? Or do we cast the electoral vote selection based on the results that are being given to us here in real time, which have now been proven to be maligned? This is a very, very difficult question. This is why you saw a lot of legislatures essentially just completely throw their hands up in the air and say, that's not my department. That's the elections commission's department. It's the election board department. It's on the counties. It's on this office or that office. You know, the Secretary of State's responsible for that. everyone threw their hands up. Nobody wanted to have the hot potato, sitting in their palms. And so that's the Electoral College, I think, in a nutshell, Carrington. And it's very, very important because the Electoral College is essentially the only constitutional bulwark that we have left against mass mail-in ballot fraud. And ballot fraud doesn't have to be mail-in, but it's most popularly accomplished throughout history through popular vote. And the only way to manipulate popular vote at a societal level scale is to incorporate injections into things like the postal way, any sort of digital exchange that occurs between the machines, right? We know that that's a concern as well. So they've spent trillions of dollars circumventing the Electoral College anyway.
Yeah.
It's essentially a business decision on behalf of the deep state for them to try and do away with the Electoral College and just amplify the model that they've been perfecting for the last 35 to 40 years in the United States. And that's why it is so important that as patriots, we keep the pressure on and we make them astutely and acutely aware that we're monitoring and watching every single thing that happens here, and that things like shifts in our system and potential usurpations of our constitutional process will not go unpunished forever.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and so how does that happen? I mean, how we're looking at a Congress that hasn't taken oaths of office, or that they're fraudulent. We're looking at a really I don't know. Do we just shit can the whole judicial system at this point? I don't. How does this? I mean, digital soldiers and people who are just paying attention, the more attention people are paying, the less they can get away with this, but it's so far underway. How does the reversal really happen? Do we, I mean, there was the Brunson brothers, that whole case coming to the Supreme Court. We never have really heard about that. Does that never come up? Or, where does this go?
Yeah,
What
that's
do
a
you,
really fantastic question.
yeah,
And
what do you
and at
think
the
about
end of
that?
the day, at the end of the day, I think that all of the component legislative and legal uh, cogs in the wheel will coalesce together to form the correct rim. And that's one of the things I think that we're trying to do. We're trying to build the rim and put the tire from the old rim onto the new rim at the same time and not lose the air pressure, which is an interesting and difficult process. I think what you're going to see, honestly, Carrington, and this is something that I talk about on the QMP show quite a bit, is the fact that there is, in response to everything that we've described so far on the call, we saw the Trump presidency as an anomaly for the ages, if there ever was one. This is a man who comes into office and does essentially everything that none of the former US presidents, save with the exception perhaps of Kennedy and Calvin Coolidge back prior to the Federal Reserve System,
Right.
or right
Andrew
around the Federal
Jackson.
Reserve. Andrew Jackson, right. This has only appeared a few times in history where a president has enacted, policy and presidential procedure using the lawful power of the U.S. executive and done so in such a flagrantly for the people kind of fashion. We saw a rolling back of regulations, the largest in history, the largest tax cuts that have ever been put into history, which directly cuts into their Federal Reserve monetary supply. That's the lifeline for their worldwide corruption and criminality. We saw the creation of a new branch of the United States military, which brought into its purview a number of those secretive military agencies and allowed for a true accountability and oversight chain of command to be implemented over things like secret space technology and the Air Force's secret space programs and prototypes. We saw an incredible response to the COVID-19 bioweapon attack on the world. I believe that response is ongoing even now in a devolution of government, continuity of government situation. I believe the United States of America has two lawful presidential positions right now, and only one of them is publicly making decision and policy on behalf of the nation. And it's worth noting, Carrington, that Biden is making decision and policy on behalf of the corporate entity, which Trump bankrupted, according to the documents that I have, in 2018. And it's a compelling document talking about case law going back to a United States case in the 70s, where the Supreme Court essentially ruled that unless the government made good on its loan, that the entire note was going to be null and void. So we did this with U.S. law. We did all of this lawfully and accordingly. We used their own corporate Supreme Court precedent against them to put the corporation into a tailspin. And so now the question, right, is how do we get enforcement? How do we get
Yeah.
law enforcement authority? What occurs here? And I think we're witnessing and living through the setup for the enforcement, the only kind of enforcement that can do away with this type of corruption, which is a short-term military control period here in the United States.
Mm.
I think between the open border, the fentanyl crisis, the child and human trafficking crises, the economic crisis that is looming, the very real possibility of another biological pandemic event to try and get people locked in their homes and lead up to an election. That's a real possibility in the NATO Western world. All of these are coalescing and converging to provide, I think, the basis in the minds and hearts of the people everywhere for military intervention to get a handle on this corruption. We know that we're in a runaway train. Most Americans at this point realize that that runaway train has, like, we ripped the emergency brake out and threw it out the window a long time ago. And so now we're headed towards the cliff, and no one is willing to stop the train. So eventually, the train is eventually going to end up off the rails, and someone is going to have to prevent it from imploding and destroying itself. And I think that is honestly the period of time that we're headed to. And I think we arrived there probably before the early fall gets underway, Carrington. They cannot allow this deep state corporatized shadow government in the background that has been so used to having total power over the government of the United States, cannot allow a return to the publicly facing U.S. executive under President Trump or any populist candidate like President Trump. The bureaucracy will be dead. The criminality will be not long in the wings for being exposed. And we have violations of Geneva here that are going to be exposed in response to COVID, the activities that have been undertaken by the various governments in the Western world. Russia is chomping at the bit to hold coalition tribunals on behalf of populations in Europe for the biological weapons that have been launched against them. So this is a period of time that I really think the only way we see, an end to the endless, if we want to call it that, is a temporary period of lawful patriotic military control to save the republic, followed with a monitored, trackable election, a transparent electoral process in the United States, fluidly back into the constitutional system that we've always, accustomed ourselves to and are aware of how it works. And then we utilize that system as a newly elected, fully in control, we the people government to destroy the vestiges of the old one.
And it's so amazing that this is being done lawfully, uh, because there must have been so many arguments and temptations for other ways of going about it. But the Constitution, I mean, maybe we worship that too much, but it's kind of the best one out there, if you ask me. The real one, I mean, the Constitution for. So then I wonder, thank you for all of that. And the question of, well, people talk about civil war. I don't see civil war. In civil war, you have to have two clear factions fighting against each other, and that isn't what's developing here. I think what I see anyway, and you tell me what you see, is civil unrest, especially in the larger cities, the blue cities. And I wonder, I mean, probably personally, my greatest concern would be the invasion of entire networks of criminals from all over the world. Uh, it's an art of war kind of an invasion. And that seems to me to require, well, that seems to me would contribute to civil unrest, along with debt default and all the things that you mentioned. But how much civil unrest there is really depends on how much the military steps in, whichever branch or version of the military steps in to manage that situation, right? I mean, we've got to have that. I think things have gotten so extreme, right?
I think that's part of it, but I would think even beyond that, the civil unrest issue, I think, is really going to depend on three main arenas: the pace and the capability and the expansiveness of a domestic protection response, should there be a militarized response in the United States. And I think you're going to see that in conjunction and in league with civilian law enforcement in every locality, right? If we assume for a moment
Yes.
that the basis of our discussion with civil unrest is is counterinsurgency warfare and counterterrorism warfare, which is what we would be dealing with the infiltration at the southern border, then that has to factor in. And the ability to surveil and recon the entirety of that network domestically, I think that's a huge component of this as well. And that takes time, unfortunately. It just takes time. The other thing that takes time is the second important component of that discussion, which is consciousness congealment at the civilization level. We know here in the United States, for example, that we have been dealing with a cesspool of public corruption that is far more focalized and is far smaller in its scope and in its centralization than we ever thought before. So that means, as a we the people standpoint, we now have a clearly defined enemy. We have a target who we can say, well, that's the actual one. That's the ultimate party responsible for the displeasure, the incongruity, the suffering, those types of things. It's no longer left versus right, R versus D, woke mobster versus patriotic rancher. It is all of us understanding that the government is out to get us. We may disagree on how that is the case and by what angles and by what weapons that entity is actually doing that with. But the fundamental understanding that the enemy is the governmental centralized powers, that's another aspect of the civil unrest and preventing large-scale civil unrest and war. And the third aspect, I think, is being able to track and trace all of your opponents, all of your individual infiltrative assets. All of these people coming across the southern border have smartphones. We know that the United States intelligence agencies and secret services, and not just the U.S. Secret Service, but other security services, have the ability through very advanced software like XKey, Prism, Hammer, and Scorecard. They are able to track in real time millions of electronic devices and correlate geolocational data in real time to provide a movement map, a behavioral heat map for anyone that's being surveilled. And so if we have the entirety of the Space Force, which is the world's largest electronic warfare platform and the largest data aggregation platform in all of human history, and we're utilizing those technological capabilities in conjunction with the domestic intelligence and foreign intelligence services that we have, so like the FBI's counterterrorism and DHS counterterrorism operations, both of whom are included in FEMA Continuity Directive 1 as supporting agencies, the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, other U.S. intelligence communities and departments that are foreign facing but have a lot of actionable intelligence context to add. All of that comes under the aggregation purview of the United States Space Force in a true military operation, right? And this is a live action military exercise that we're talking about when I talk about a possible worldwide alliance and potential military intervention here domestically. Mm-hmm. So with those three things in mind, we can appreciate that we are walking a dangerous razor's edge. We are right over the edge, but we are not off the cliff. And what we're doing, I think, is balancing the criminality of the rest of the world on our shoulders, which is kind of poetically fitting because unfortunately we financed most of it. Mm-hmm. And we're doing it long enough for true cleanup operations to occur in localities and other countries around the world that give them a chance to get their government back as well, so that they're not coming under control of the Taliban, for example, or Al-Qaeda, or the South American cartels again, right, or the Central American cartels. All of these organizations, which are primarily funded by the United States and the United Nations, are sending their best and brightest and most capable, to the United States of America. Now, if we have a little bit of faith for a moment, and this is where faith comes in, and this is why I say that I can't say that this is the absolute way that it is, but I choose to have a little bit of faith about it. If we believe that the United States military is positioning itself for an eventual domestic protection intervention, the United States military is the most capable combative force that any of these paramilitary groups around the world are ever going to have to face down. And most of them, I think, acknowledging that they're working for money and not because they just love the mission, or love their purpose or their principle, I think they would lay down their arms if they were engaged at scale simultaneously here in the United States. That also has the benefit of having siphoned off their influence capability for other nation states around the rest of the world. So now they can get a civilian handle, a true reflective we the people handle on their government, on their agencies, on their policies, and we can all work together in a better way instead of one of us or all of us coming to the table at the international discourse with our arms twisted behind our backs.
But it has to happen here. It's happening here. And as you said, we caused it, we. And whenever I say we, really, it's not we the people, it's they, the deep state. And we the people have allowed this to happen. But I think one of the ways we've allowed it to happen is through, well, it's through the financial system and through everyone having to work so hard. They've got their head down. They can't even begin to see what's really going on, you know? So it has to happen here. And it's really great to hear you say that. I think a lot of people are pretty freaked out about how many have crossed our borders now. I don't even, what is it, 12 million? I don't even know. I don't know. Somebody knows. It's not me.
It's very high numbers, and
Yeah.
what is interesting about that is that within those numbers, you're seeing a sort of um, a disenchantment, not only on the behalf of, say, the more liberal, the more Democrat leaning American voter with the idea of open borders and sanctuary cities. That, of course, is the domestic implication for the consciousness, right, and the mindset. And there's a value to that. But there is a significant disenchantment from the refugee sector ad hoc, because not all of these people coming are invaders. A lot of them are refugees. They're just being financed by organizations for the wrong reasons, so they're here for the wrong reasons, and they're becoming disenchanted with the American dream, the American system, this idea that this is this shining city on a hill, and if we can just go topple that city, then this deity will be glorified, or that group will be glorified, or our belief system will be supreme, right? They're arriving here, Carrington, and they're realizing, wait a minute, this is like a third world trash heap. We don't need to subjugate this. There's nothing to topple here. And by the way, it's really expensive here, and people are really rude here, and it's messy and gross. I think I'd like to go back home. And so
Yeah.
you're actually seeing, this behavior in the form of migrants protesting in New York City
I
just a few
know.
days ago, right? The disenfranchisement is remarkable. So
Yeah.
it is a wake up call, if you will, not just for the United States of America and how dangerous open borders can actually be, but also for nomads around the planet who would be better served if they could get a true, transparent handle on the machinations of their own governments. They would
Yeah.
be better served economically, bolstering and supporting their homelands. And they're beginning to realize that around the world.
Yeah. That's a lot easier than coming here and what the story used to be. You come here and you get a job as a truck driver or whatever, and then you bring your family of seven over here and you have to integrate, but you wind up creating a separate enclave. And that whole way is, well, I just love what you just said about bolstering, finding, even finding their own government, and bolstering that and participating in that. And that's what has to happen here too, which is what we're doing here, having this conversation. So, while we're talking about the, well, it makes me think of criminality, of course, because there are criminals, a lot of criminals coming. And it also in that recent interview with Gail on free range, well, you were focusing on the prison system in the United States, which is just deplorable. It's so bad. And for myself, as a songwriter and recording artist, I perceive that music makes the world go round. I mean, what meeting besides a business meeting, a government meeting, what event does not require music? They all do. And the energy of music is so powerful for especially popular music and especially for our youth. And the what happened with hip hop when hip hop was infiltrated was that, and I'm sure you know this, but there were investors in the prison system came in and told the producers of hip hop that they had to glamorize gang crime or else, because they wanted to keep the prisons full. And that's why the prisons are so full, and gang, what do you want to call it? Style even has been glamorized. That's why guys wear their pants halfway down to their knees. It's all because of, you know, guys in prison not being able to have a belt and their pants falling off. So anyway, that's kind of going a little bit aside, but it's all part of it, right? And I just I just think that's a really important piece of the criminality in the prison system, that's been crime has been so glamorized in Hollywood, in our movies, and then very specifically in hip hop. And I don't know what you may want to say about that, but I just wanted to bring that up. Any insights you may have about how that plays into this story? People don't really address music very much, except from the point of view of how corrupt Hollywood is, and it surely is. But as far as the prison system and criminality goes, and of course recent arrests that we've seen.
You know, legitimately, Carrington, music is an interesting beast all of its own, in its own right. It is, I think, the language of the living God in words that we can't understand, and I'm using words, in air quotes.
Yeah.
Um, and it is powerfully effective, AFFECTIVE, effective of the human body, the human aura, the human electrocellular field, and the ability of the human mind to focus itself into patterns that align more with God and align more with our best and highest.
I'll wait a minute and see if you may need to go out and come back in. Have we got you back? Yeah, you were saying.
I was someone at an agency loves me today. Um,
Oh yeah, you're popular.
so, with regards to the R&B and the hip hop usurpation that occurred at the behest of the then CIA director, a number of former CIA personnel actually became they were helped into positions of very large influence with record labels. So think outgoing agents, agents that recruiting agents to find and bring in talent. Various lawyers that had worked at agency in the 80s and 90s began to go and find civilian careers post agency in the civilian world. And then a lot of that was in like places like the Atlantic and Atlantic Records, right? There's a reason they call it Atlantic Records, right? And so looking at music and what they've done to music became the vector to wage essentially what amounted to a consciousness level war against the people. And it was for a number of different aims: to keep everybody in a stressed out place, to keep everyone anxious, concerned. That's why you hear so much deep bass and ELF type musical frequencies out there, because they hold the human spirit, the spiritual field that's around our body. It's real. I promise you, it's there.
It
It's
is.
real, and it holds it down and it affects it. And so what comes as a result of that is an inability to actualize, I think, God's creation in the best way that we can, right? If I'm only able to hear every third word that you're telling me on a phone call, for example, kind of like how we've had here with our cyber cutoffs on my end, then the message can be distorted or lost, or at the very least, it's incomplete. But if we have a nice fluid connection, if there's a nice broad pathway for information to flow back and forth, then there's a much deeper, much more intimate, much more meaningful conversation that can happen in something like that. So the same is true of our spiritual makeup and frequencies, and the musical environment that surrounds us and has surrounded us for a number of decades now is very much geared towards the antithetical purposes of that. Now, what I find is absolutely amazing is that you're starting to see people realize that this is a commercial profiteering tactic. This is a consciousness based spiritual warfare weapon. It's also a way to pad the prison profiteering system. It's also a way to keep certain inner city communities in constant whipped up states, which allows them to continue to buy our drugs that we like to bring in from various nations around the world, right? The CIA is the largest financer of drug trafficking anywhere on earth. The Mexican cartels can only aspire to be anything like what the CIA has been. And
Yeah.
so, that being said, the reality of these webs and how interconnected and how interfeeding they are with one another is becoming apparent to the average person out there, right? The average person is realizing, wait a minute, they ran a traffic light and drove over some park benches on or some city benches on the sidewalk, and you gave him 12 months in jail. That doesn't make any sense. Or wait a minute, he's 20 years old and he's got 2 grams of certain green items in his vehicle, and yes, that's not legal, and yes, there should be punishment. But you're putting this 20-year-old in prison for 5 years, and you're giving him a felony,
Yeah.
which just completely decimates his ability on the other side of that, provided that the punishment is even just at that longitudinal period of time. but you decimate the ability after that period of time to find employment, which would encourage better habits, which would encourage that young 20-year-old, by this point, 25, into a better lifestyle, right? It's sort of you cut the knees out from under them, and then you intentionally hold something over top of them, which prevents them from even being able to adjust to that. And so that orientation inside the legal judicial complex, the prison profiteering complex is what I call it, is absolutely interconnected to the things like the music and the pop culture and the entertainment vectors, right? Because CIA has its hands all over both of those venues. And they cooperate, or excuse me, they work in league with. Cooperates sort of implies a cooperative arrangement, but they work in league with self-interested private equity parties like billionaires. For example, Tom Flores or Forrest, I forget the gentleman's name. He's the CEO of Platinum Equity. They work in league with these very privately centered, selfishly motivated groups to expand, the economic output of that prison system. Here's a good example. Tom Flores, I believe is his name, CEO, founder of Platinum Equity. Platinum Equity owns the Detroit Pistons, which is an athletic group, right? So there's your entertainment intersection, right? There's your CIA potential. That's your potential junction point. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying that it could be, and it absolutely is in other areas. If we go back throughout the ownership of sports teams. And then Platinum Equity also is the majority stakeholder and the controlling interest in a prison telecommunications group called Securus. And so Securus is one of the largest in-prison phone provider services in the United States of America. They're owned by this billionaire who owns the Detroit Pistons athletic team. And Platinum Equity was the largest donor, the largest sponsor behind a law that passed last year in the state of Oklahoma, which expanded a number of misdemeanors to felonies. So that creates a longer capitalized asset, right? That allows for a greater extraction of monetary value over a larger length of time. And there is clearly a nepotistic relationship there between the government interest and the private money and the private equity's interest in economy, commercial success, right? Securus being bigger and better and growing more and having more money, in it, right? It's all greed based, and it's completely inverted, I think, from what a common law rehabilitative prison system would actually look like. And that's, perhaps another story for another time.
Right.
But suffice to say that the CIA, the U.S. government as a whole, through the various law enforcement junctions that it has worked in league with private equity and private media and private entertainment and essentially the entirety of the cinematic industry over the last 100 years to consolidate the brainwashing, the mind control quotient that they're able to achieve, and to maximize the labor profiteering system, which exists not just in the prisons but also outside of the prisons. When you look at things like inflation that they have set up here in the United States.
Yeah. Thank you. And I love what you were saying when we got cut off about the power of music, circling back to that. Um, well, music soothes the savage breast, right? And it can ignite the masses. It's such a powerful tool and easily misused. It has been misused. And it's vibration itself, right? Tesla told us frequency and vibration. It's all frequency and vibration. And I love what you were saying too about we really do have an electromagnetic field, be assured. And that is invisibly messed with in ways that lead to everything that you just said. It's hard to even really get how it truly is all connected to that degree, but it really is. So thank you for laying that out. And we all know that when someone goes into a prison for what's been turned into a felony and has to spend years there, what does he do? He develops his criminal network. So for the most part. So, and I love the idea of a common law prison system, and that maybe that's something we'll get to talk about at some point. Well, we still have a little bit of time left, and there's a lot of directions I could go in, but since we were talking about frequency, it came up recently in various discussions. I've heard it claimed that CERN was flipped by the white hats to generate positive frequencies. And I was wondering if, by the same token, if the 5G towers could be used the same way, um, that it could be just the flip of a switch, that affects our very DNA. And do you suppose that might be part of a white hat plan?
I do apologize, Carrington. I was cut off about 20 seconds ago. I was with you until then. So leading up to the DNA, do you care to give me a short recap?
Yeah, sure. I just wonder if, so I've heard it claimed that CERN was flipped by the White Hats to produce positive vibrations. And that I'm wondering, couldn't 5G towers be used for the same purpose in a positive way that affects our very DNA, the frequency and vibrations from those towers? Do you suppose that the White Hats are using the towers for that or plan to?
Um, it would only be speculative, Carrington. I have to put that out there first and disclaim. But I do believe that we will see the day will not long ahead of us in lifetimes where 5G system will be appropriately tuned in a fashion amplifies loving vibrations, frequencies of the solfeggio,
Yes,
the great scales of David and the harp that
yes.
provide such categorical improvement to every angle of the spiritual person, right? Some schools of thought call them chakras. I prefer to think of them as energy centers, but there are points within the human being that God, I think, intersects with us in a more direct and in a more complete fashion, right? We are kept alive through the growing out from those points, right? The spine is the very first thing to form within the womb, and that would be the same pathway of right, the same column holding all of those powerful centers together. And so something like 528, or 432, or I think it's 769 or 780 something. I forget the exact hertz number, but these frequencies amplified on a 5G level across the infrastructure that we have in the Western world now, and really the world over as a result of the last 10 years worth of telecom projects. We
Lost ya. Left off at telecom projects. I don't know if you can pick it up, but the
yes,
towers all over the world.
telecom projects.
Yeah.
Right, all over the world. And so we could, there is scientific and real research to support the idea that this is the largest healing infrastructure that has ever been devised in all.
I lost you there, but so sorry. Go ahead.
Not a problem. What I was saying is, with regards to the towers and their ability to be leveraged as a modality for good, right? And you can deliver frequency healing all the way down to the DNA and rest and stop damage from the kill shots that we've all seen rolled out into the world the last 4 years. So that's extremely plausible, and I think there's a great and large volume of real scientific research to back up that theorem. That's an extremely plausible situation. But I can't sit here and say one way or the other as far as the guarantee or not of that being a part of our journey, because truthfully I don't know. And if it's not now, it should be by the time this is all over. We have
Yes.
before us the opportunity with the 5G system to impugn that with loving solfeggio frequencies that are not filtered through the electronic medium, the electro smog and the electro cloud that exists around the world. Right, we can deliver those frequencies directly from transmitters out into the world, into the vibrational and quantum field that we all live in, that we're all a part of, right? It makes up our very reality and our very being. I call it the Holy Spirit of God and the Holy Spirit of all things. And so that, excuse me, the ability to affect that and to amplify that in agreement with that spirit rather than in antithesis against that spirit, that's the largest healing opportunity I think that has ever been given to mankind. And coupled with an expanding understanding of how frequencies, energies, electricity, things of these nature, I think that may be how we get a true understanding of the human body and what human health and wellness actually means. We've had such a physiologically focused such a physically focused health model in the last 150 to 200 years. And I am not knocking that. That is enrapturing. I know wonderful God-fearing practitioners and even just practitioners who are, more spiritually agnostic, but they love people and they love humanity. And they're absolutely amazed with the human body. They love the human body. I just believe that our understanding has been intentionally throttled, and that our ancients had a great deal of knowledge about what our true capabilities and abilities as human beings really are, coming into the world. And so now we have to reclaim that and catch back up.
Yes. Yes, and I think it's so thrilling to be here now because this is the turning point where we turn to that. And even if you can't say for sure that this is something that's going to happen specifically with the 5G towers, just us talking about it brings it, you know, helps to bring it into being. I I subscribe to the notion or theory that we're in a sort of a some kind of simulation, um, limited maybe by the speed of light. And I've heard different people talk about this, but there are many times throughout any given day when I feel like I'm in a simulation. I'm in this incredibly expensive video game, and that time itself is part of the illusion. Now, it may be that everything that you just said about how this electronic smog, this frequency smog that we're in, that is the this simulation that we're in, that there are real selves that exist with far greater potential than what we're limited to, um, exist. We're here, but it feels like we're in a simulation because of that. But this leads me to I'm going to just ask you one more question. It's kind of a big one, and I know we're just about out of time. But given all that, then what is going on? What is Earth? What is space? I wonder this every single day. What is NASA? What is Earth? What is space? And do you want to talk about that? Do you want to go there?
We can absolutely go there, and it's sort of a nice spiritual, plateau to end our conversation on, because the nature of the deception is that deep, right? They have sought to hide from us our identity, our reality, who we really are, what God really is, who God really is, how many different versions of sentient beings have existed here in the world with us, right alongside us for thousands of years. There's a huge spiritual component to the cover up, the creation that is the model of belief about our world and about our lifetimes, right? And about what life itself actually is. Now, there's two different directions I think this conversation goes. We'll have to pick one and come back to the other the next time. But one of the directions it can go is the idea of consciousness itself. I forget the great scientist, it might have been Max Planck. It was early 20th century who made the statement that without the observer, there is nothing to be observed. So, in other words, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer to that is actually no. It doesn't make a sound,
No.
because without the ability to interpret whatever was put out into the consciousness field, the reality field that we all live in, then there is nothing of interpretive value, right? So there's no sound. But if there's someone there or there's something there to acknowledge it, then there is a sound, right? It's a philosophical debate at the end of the day. It's not provable. But what is provable is the fact that NASA recorded a number of the moon landing videos in swimming pools in the Nevada desert.
Yeah.
What is provable is that we have a significant militarized presence on the Antarctic ice ring, the Antarctic ice shelf that people, or back in the day, it used to be the Antarctic Circle, right? There is a huge militarized presence upon that plateau that we know virtually nothing about, and that a large segment of NASA's black budget actually ends up funding and going to. Additionally, there's a number of research projects that are by presidential commission and presidential appointment to that commission only, and you don't get to know, according to U.S. law, who the president is actually appointing to these commissions and these research oversight boards. And they conduct extraordinarily expensive projects with your tax dollars on the Antarctic shelf to understand things like the nature of the sky. What is sky ice, for example? I have pictures, very clear resolution pictures of pieces of what appear to be large ice chunks that these individuals claim is completely frozen solid oxygen in its purest form. And it's a deep iridescent blue, just like the sky that's above us. They melt moisturelessly without water. They just melt, they just evaporate into the air, right? And they evaporate very quickly. It's why they have to be studied on the Antarctic shelf. They
Right.
can't be, excuse me, they can't be moved, in a cargo holder or cargo space or anything like that, for example. And even vacuum sealing provides no ability to preserve them, right? So they have to be studied where they're at, where they're capable of being found. And this is on the Antarctic Circle in a particular location. And so when we talk about things like Earth and our life and everything that we know as far as the nature of the universe and who God is and who God may have placed here with us, what beings God may have created, for our pleasure and enjoyment and friendship, right? It's all about friendship at the end of the day. And I think we sometimes put God in a box, and I truthfully I don't have all of the answers. I have very very interesting suppositions. I think about some things, and I find a very fascinating and demonstrable school of research going all of the way back to places like the FBI vault, the CIA vault, various diaries from former military personnel conducting clandestine operations or R&D operations in league with joint agency projects. I've talked to UFO whistleblowers who have a militarized background. They understand these processes and these protocols. And the overall theme of all of that community and all of that body of research is that what we've been told about the model of our world, whether it's flat, whether it's round, whether it's a casserole dish, whether it's ovular in nature, whether there is some sort of sphere within a sphere, like with the Oort cloud, things like that, whether the sun is a more present, immediate entity versus very far away and how eclipses work, right? All of
Yeah.
that is inside the umbrella of having been a candidate for extreme deception. And so figuring out what is actually true is almost required. Well, it's almost required that we have some spiritual attunement and some guidance to that, and that we be open to what God may have actually placed for us here in the world, right? God is all things at all time and no time. And so everything here for us is for our benefit. And being able to come back to that realization, I think, is going to be, a really integral part, Carrington, in us being readmitted into the grander chorus of all creation.
Mm, I love that. Yes, because we're part of God. We're not separate. And so experiencing time it is something of an illusion because there isn't, it's all simultaneous, right? Well, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you so much. And I've seen the photographs of the sky ice. They have to keep it there, right? Because otherwise you can't keep it cold enough or it disappears, right? Isn't that um, the,
What they've determined is it's not even a temperature variant. The chemical composition of it, once it's removed from the broader whole, causes
oh,
it to evaporate into the ether. It causes it to evaporate into nothing. And they're not able to figure it out. And quite frankly, Carrington, this is one of the things that, when I sit back from the desk, I sometimes look up and laugh because they've worked for thousands of years to be smarter than God. And even
right.
with the most advanced technology and all of the money and power in world history, they're still not able to do it.
No, they can't do it. It's so awesome, isn't it? It's really, and to be here now and watch this unfold and know that we're on that brink and we're being hatched out of this giant mythical egg. It's really awesome. Well, I want people to be able to find you, and I said at the beginning, people will be looking for you everywhere. And I will also put at the beginning, I'll put uh, um, on the screen where they can find you. But would you tell us now so that people can go right there right away?
Absolutely. So I'm found in three places online. The audio files and other interviews I do, such as this one, can be found on Rumble. The URL is rumble.com/user/QNewsPatriot. I can be found on Truth Social at the handle real SG Anon with a red check mark. And I can be found on X, formerly Twitter, at the handle TheQ with a blue check mark. And it's worth remembering that the Rumble and X profiles, while SGAnon is my username and it's what I go by, those are not actually the profiles. The X profile is QNewsPatriot and the Rumble channel is QNewsPatriot as well.
Thank you. Okay, well, this has been really, really a treat. And I just want to thank you again. Thank your family. We love you, SG. We really appreciate you. We love you. And we are doing this together in love and with higher intelligence every single day. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. God bless, and I look forward to coming back.
Thank you for being with us. We'll have SG back again as soon as we can to continue discussion in all different areas that we couldn't quite get to, all these different vectors of this amazing journey that we're on. Please hit the like button and subscribe and pass it on.